Our focus standard for this lesson comes from Grade 7, Statistics and Probability, Standard 1. Understand generalizations about a population from a sample are valid only if the sample is random and representative of that population. Our topic for today's lesson comes from Data and Statistics, Valid Claims. Our essential question is, how do we evaluate if inferences made from data and statistics are valid? Please take a moment, pausing the video if you need to copy down the topic and the essential question into our header, along with today's date, set up your question column and your note column, and resume the video when you're ready to begin. A couple important things to keep in mind here. Valid, we keep hearing this word in the standard, in the topic, and in the essential question, and it's important that we know when we talk about valid, we're saying that something is reliable or that it's true. So these are kind of some synonyms for that word valid. So valid claims must be made from data samples that meet the following three criteria. They have to be from a sample or the entire population, but a sample that is representative of the population. Participants need to be selected at random, meaning that all members have an equally likely chance to be selected, and it needs to be unbiased. The participants can't be predisposed to an idea, and we'll see more about that as we go through some different examples today. So we're going to be evaluating inferences made from some data and some statistics, and we're going to have to decide, are those claims valid? Do they meet these three criteria? So let's go ahead and look at our first example. The counselor surveyed the students at Selwood Middle School to determine what food to provide at the school dance. She asked every sixth grader what snack they preferred, and 58% said they would prefer pizza. Can the counselor claim that 58% of all Selwood Middle School students would prefer pizza? So looking at her data and the people that she asked, we have to ask ourselves, is this valid? Is this a valid claim to say that 58% of Selwood Middle School students prefer pizza? So here's our checklist. It mentions that it's random, so it meets that. Doesn't seem to be biased, but is it representative of the population? Selwood Middle School students. I'd have to say no, and I hope you agree with me, because this is not a representative sample of all Selwood Middle School students. She asked every sixth grader, but at our middle school there are 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, so she left out 2/3 of the population. So it's not a representative sample because it doesn't include any 7th and 8th graders. She could claim that 58% of all 6th graders prefer pizza. That is what her statistic was, and it was, she asked everybody in that population. So if she only wants to think about 6th graders, then that is one thing. But she could not infer that 58% of all Selwood Middle School students prefer pizza because it wasn't representative of all students at Selwood. Let's take a look at the next example. The City of Portland conducted a poll of 500 randomly selected students from Cleveland High School and asked how many times a week they use public transit. The data showed that 225 out of 500 students polled use public transit 4 times a week. Can the City of Portland infer that 45% of all Cleveland High School students use public transit 4 times a week? Well, first I would want to check to make sure where this statistic came from. So if they said 225 out of 500 students, we would do 225 divided by 500, which is 45 hundredths, which is 45%. So that their math checks out here. It is 45% of the students polled. So, can they infer that 45% of all Cleveland high school students use public transit 4 times a week? So, remember our checklist. Is it representative of the population? Well, they had randomly selected students from Cleveland High School. Okay, and 500 is a sizable amount, so it's a good proportion of the students at Cleveland High School. It is random. They randomly selected those students, and it's not biased. It doesn't say they stood outside the bus stop or something like that to ask this question. So, what do you think? If you said yes, I would agree with you. The data, as we mentioned, is random. It is representative of Cleveland High School students. So if they asked 500 randomly selected students and found that 45% of them use public transit 4 times a week, they could infer that 45% of all Cleveland High School students use public transit. And that might help them make some plans about the bus routes and the public transit options that they provide in and around Cleveland High School area. Let's take a look at our third example. Standing outside the movie theater, Jeremiah asked 100 people what they preferred to do for fun. The options were going to an amusement park, seeing a movie, or going to an arcade. 89% said that they like to see a movie. Can Jeremiah infer that 89% of people in his town prefer to see a movie? So think back to our checklist, maybe look back up at the top. What are the 3 things we have to check for to evaluate if this is a valid claim and decide whether or not it is? If you said no, that Jeremiah cannot infer that 89% of people in his town prefer to see a movie, I would agree with you. This is definitely an example of a biased sample. He took the data, asking 100 people standing outside of a movie theater, and one of the options was seeing a movie. And this is a really high statistic, 89%, 89 out of 100. Well, most likely if he's standing outside of a movie theater, chances are more people of those 100 he asked are either going in to see a movie or exiting from seeing a movie, and they are predisposed to answer that seeing a movie is their favorite activity. So if he wanted to make a valid claim and he was going to ask about amusement parks, seeing a movie, or going to an arcade, he needs to find a neutral location or a neutral way of asking people that where they are not predisposed to answer one of those options. Let's take a look at our fourth and final example. Mrs. Bond surveyed a random sample of 7th graders at Selwyn Middle School. Here's the data that she collected. So she was asking 7th graders about who their favorite local team was. The Winterhawks, the local hockey team, Timbers, the men's soccer team, Thorns, the women's soccer team, Blazers, the local basketball team, or Portland Pickles, the summer baseball league. And here are the responses. So it looks like she asked 25 students because the denominator is all out of 25. And here are what people said, how many people out of 25 responded that this would be their favorite team. So which of these 2 statements would be a valid inference that we could make from Mrs. Bond's survey? Is it that 36% of 7th grade students in Oregon said their favorite team is the Timbers? Or would it be that Blazers are the favorite team of 20% of 7th grade students at Selwyn Middle School? So go ahead, maybe do some calculations to see if you can come up with these percentages and ask yourself the 3 questions. Is it representative? Is it random? And is it unbiased? That's going to conclude our video for today. Please make sure that your notes are complete and come ready to look at more data and statistics in class.